Hey everyone, welcome back to Secret Sonics. Here's another reissue for you guys. This one is with IRKO. This episode first appeared back in December of 2020, so quite a long time ago. And given IRKO's successes recently, having mixed the latest Kanye record and building an amazing studio in LA, I figured this episode was worth revisiting. And we talked about so many things, including his journey, his approach to mixing, so much more. I think you're going to dig this episode. So here is my episode with IRKO, originally episode 76, once again, right here on Secret Sonics.
You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Join us weekly for honest conversations with real-world music producers and audio professionals.
Hello and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I am your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is IRKO. IRKO is a multi-platinum award-winning audio engineer. He grew up near Venice, Italy, but has been living and working in the United States for 15 years. Music has taken IRKO around the world, and he has been very fortunate to have worked with artists such as Kanye West, Snoop Dogg, Sia, Pitbull, Jay-Z, and many, many more. Former guest of the show, Nicholas DiLorenzo, put the two of us in touch and recommended that I have IRKO on the show. And I reached out, and he's been gracious enough to join us on the air. So welcome to Secret Sonics, IRKO.
Hello, Ben. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. How are you doing today?
Great. Another day in paradise.
Awesome. So tell me a bit about your story. Like, I know you have an interesting story coming from Italy to the United States. I guess you could go back even earlier. How did you get into music? How did you get into production? And just give us a brief rundown of your background.
For sure. To me, the first attraction to music wasn't even music. It was audio. So I remember very clearly, messing around with the EQs on stereos that my dad would bring home, or, getting in a new car, trying to mess around with the tweeter and, the frequency response of that. So that's a very distinct memory in my childhood. And naturally, my passion for the audio, of course, was tied in with music, though the audio came first for me. And then eventually, the next thing that I discovered was that there were different genres of music that, in which different aesthetics of audio were come into play. And that's how I discovered hip-hop music. And, growing up in a very tiny town in Europe, there was nothing more foreign than some American-based aesthetic and culture that had nothing to do with what I knew,
Right. And this is before the internet, and everybody had access to everything, which is
that's right.
The different world we live in now.
This was before the internet. This was before CDs even. It was, cassette tape era,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So that was definitely interesting, But yeah, that's kind of how it started with me. Fell in love with this genre that was so foreign, so distant from my reality, because at the time, New York boom bap hip hop music had the biggest drums, the biggest impact, the biggest low end, and especially compared to what was around me in Italy, you can only imagine what kind of music was around. In the late 80s, early 90s, it was completely different. And obviously, at the time, I did not speak English. I mean, I still have my difficulties nowadays with it. But, I say that because I did not know what the hell the guy was talking about on the records, To me, it sounded like blah, 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 blah. That's all it was. So, to me, there was no awareness of the cultural implications and what was talked about, or the message or lack thereof of this kind of music. So to me it was strictly about sonics at this point. And then eventually my English...
was there a record that you found that really blew your mind, that kind of got things rolling?
I cannot tell you an exact one because it's a blur. It was the early 90s at this point. But I do remember the first two cassette tapes that I had were Snoop Dogg Doggy Style. I clearly remember that one. and Friday, the soundtrack to the movie Friday. I had both on tape. Now, I don't know if those were the first ones, probably not, but I remember having those original too, and that was another thing, because, to get your hands on actual music coming from America back then in Italy, it was like very difficult. It was, getting original music from over here was something somewhat comparable to getting illegal drugs from, the south of the border. It's kind of like that almost. Wow. And then, of course, I had an unlimited amount of copies and mixtapes, like at the time.
Yeah, because you could record onto the cassette deck from whatever.
Yeah. So it was very simple to either copy them or getting copies, And so I don't know exactly one particular artist that I can point out on that, but I remember having tapes from EPMD and Public Enemy and so forth. Then it was Cypress Hill, and then the CDs came, and CDs kind of like, with the, it was a little different, But yeah, it started on tapes.
Yeah. So what happens after that?
I became the guy that was spreading around this music, this new music that wasn't really available in my hometown, in my high school, or whatever the case, right? Now we're fast forwarding, maybe 10 years or something. And so that's when I started making mixtapes and things like that, and on CDs at this point. And kind of learned that girls liked R&B more than rap. And,
It's a little smoother,
Yeah, definitely more harmonic content in there, yeah. And that's when I started, spreading around this kind of thing. And I kind of grew the taste for different kind of music. Again, it was very difficult to find that kind of product around. But at this point, I started to travel around a lot more with my family over summers and stuff like that. So I had more chances of finding these CDs or whatever, especially going around in other countries where, CDs were actually sold. American CDs were actually sold. And so it was a little easier to find them. So, the move was to buy a Busta Rhymes CD in Germany in the summer and then come back to Italy, make copies and sell the shit around so that I can recoup the money. So now it's hilarious because, 20 years later, now I am actually working with a lot of these artists that I grew up listening to. And so I always tell them, hey, man, I fucking bootleg the shit out of your stuff when I was a kid. But, to kind of, that music would have not reached that audience anyway. So I kind of like dressed it up as I was your PR,
Yeah, it's funny. It's like I tell people on the show often how, like, I actually grew up in the States, but now I'm living in Israel, and Israelis, everyone in Israel uses Cubase because everybody had like ripped Cubase, I don't know, 20 years ago, 15 years ago. So it became the software that everyone in Israel used. But now they're all buying it. So, right,
whatever works,
Cubase
right?
is having the last laugh, right? Like, you spread around the gospel, people listen to it.
That's right.
That was like it's like the inevitable with Napster and stuff. Like you can't stop those floodgates from being opened, right?
Right.
Wow. So I saw somewhere on maybe it was in one of your videos that you sent me a video that you're building a new studio. I want to talk about that. But like you had a couple studios in Italy before you moved to America. Do you want to like briefly touch on that and then maybe talk about moving to America and what that was like?
Yeah. So it started in the bedroom, obviously, like it usually does, right? And did that for a few years, and then that's when I explored like the production side of things and making beats and things like that. And eventually, I went to audio engineering school. First 4 months or so, I interned for one of my teachers, and then the second 4 months or 5 or something, I actually built a little production studio in the basement, basically next to my dad's garage, right? And so that was Studio Beat. There was no number at that point. I called it Studio Beat because I was making beats in the freaking studio. So obviously that's what we were going to call it, right?
Straight up.
So did that for a while. And eventually let me see, I'm trying to like summarize the story shortly, because if not, it's going to be a very long tale. But
right, exactly.
Basically, after that, I moved on to Okay, so this has been a trend in my life, right? It's always been massive steps. It hasn't rarely been like a gradual, like slow slope kind of thing, right? It's been massive steps. So that was the first massive step, was to go from a little, garage room that was not much bigger than a small bedroom to a standalone 2 control rooms, 6 live rooms, recording studio, which was the biggest one in the northeast of Italy. And that happened very, very early. I was 20 something. I think I was 22 when I did that. And of course I had no money, but I was able to place a record that I had fully worked on, meaning I developed the artist, I recorded the artist, I tuned the artist, I produced the whole thing, I mixed I had done everything. And I was able to sell the entire project to one of the biggest labels in Italy. And so when I went and picked up the check, I picked it up, I smelled it for a second, and then I put it back into the business, basically I was still back to being broke, basically. Like, yes, I had a big place where I could do stuff, but it still had to be equipped with all of the stuff that I wanted to put in.
So you built it yourself? You built the studio?
No. So, and that's the other thing. When I got into this space, the building itself, all the walls, the acoustics and everything existed already. So yes, I had to build the equipment and the interior of the studio. Actually, not even the interior, just the equipment, the console, the tie lines, the cable management, things like that. Yes, I had to do, but everything else was already done. So I basically skipped through the entire process of building an actual studio. And what happened is it took me about 2 years to get all the equipment in because I had put all the money into the real estate, right? So that was a big accomplishment for somebody with no money. So basically what happened in the next 2 years is anytime I would do a session, I would have, say, I profited, say, $2,000 or something. I would buy an 1176, put it in the rack, so I'm back to zero, right?
Yeah.
And then the next session, okay, now I got an extra 1,500. Okay, I'm going to buy a Lexicon reverb, slide it in the rack. And that kept going for 2 years until it was done. And then eventually I made my way to America, which is a whole nother story right there. But I got to America while, as soon as the studio was somewhat functional, I went to America and to New York. And that was an incredible, I got a very warm welcome to America kind of moment because I got to work with big celebrities almost right away. And so that's how it kind of happened. And that's how the beginning was.
So how did you like end up taking all that gear from Italy to America down the road, or did you leave it there, sell it there? Like, what did you end up doing?
So the second studio, the big studio, has been functional for 11 years. So it took me 2 to make it and assemble it and everything. And then in the next maybe 3 years after the first 2, I was going back and forth. So I was still doing sessions in Italy. But basically, I had built a team there with 2 engineers. Two people were always using it. The 2 people switched over time, but it was always 2 people running it while I was gone. So yes, I left all the gear there and the know-how. I groomed the engineers to run my sessions and stuff. And so they were running the studio while I was gone. Eventually, when I shut it down, I moved the gear slowly. Not all of it, of course, because it was too much. The console is still in Europe. In fact, if you know anybody that wants to buy a console in Italy, it's still there in storage.
Okay, we'll chat after the conversation.
Yes. And then eventually I brought some of the gear over to America over the time, I stuffed, my DBX 165A in the luggage, wrapped around freaking clothes and stuff.
Oh yeah. I've done that also. Yeah.
Yeah. That's because why would you want to ship it, right? You can just put it in the freaking luggage. So that's what I did over time. And I remember one time, actually, I had my mom come in to visit, and I had her pick up one of my distressors and put it into her bag. So imagine, this Italian lady coming in at LAX, and imagine if the guy opened the thing like, what is this thing? This looks dangerous, and it says attack. What the hell is... Finally, luckily it didn't happen, but, it would have been funny, right?
Yeah, totally. It would have been fine, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I've snuggled stuff the other way because the gear is so much cheaper in America than it is in Israel.